Welcome to the Project Flux podcast, where James and Yoshi explore the cutting edge of AI and data analytics in the worlds of project delivery and productivity. Today, they have Ali of Timist with them, a pioneer in lean thinking and project management, to discuss how data-driven strategies can revolutionize project delivery. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to the Project Flux newsletter for the latest insights and updates. And don't forget to follow the Project Flux podcast on your favourite podcast player to never miss an episode. Let's get started.
Hello, Ali, and welcome to the Project Flux podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Hello, James. Thank you for inviting me. Looking forward to this conversation.
Well, we've chatted so much in the past, haven't we, at various events and PDA events. I thought it would be great to let the listeners hear what you've got to say as well, because you've come up with some incredibly innovative strategies in your time. And, you've been involved in a lot of the kind of task forces around construction, going all the way back to Latham and Egan report. So I'm extremely excited to hear what you've got to say today, and I'm sure the listeners will gain a lot from your insights. But before we go there, Ali, could you just tell us about, your experience? You've got an extensive background in construction management and lean thinking in particular. So can you just tell us about your journey and what kind of inspired you to create Timeist?
I started on as a site engineer at Terminal 4 in 1980, and then after 3-4 years, working through the management levels, I got to the dizzy height of being put in charge of a project. And after about 6 months, I thought, this is not for me. I can't spend my time progress chasing and arguing and point scoring and blaming and defensive reasoning, what I call it. So I thought, right, I'm not doing this. And I then went and said, I'm leaving. And they said, oh, no, don't leave. Why? I said, I don't know. They said, this just doesn't seem right. Nothing seemed to work. So I left and then signed up for an MBA, then ended up get a research position in the automotive industry. Then I realized what right was, things working, the right color door arriving at the right color car every time. And a few other things I realized is the fact that, there's a lot of science behind the whole production system, and there is a live data. And sort of my conclusion was the reason I didn't enjoy delivering projects is because there was, you didn't know what the score was. You didn't, you were just keeping people busy. And my argument now is, is like everybody's talking about watching the Olympics, and if people didn't know what the score was, the participant wouldn't really be feeling the tension, and neither would we. And everybody has live score available. If it's not sort of time or showing, at least they know when they're running or swimming next to them where they are relative to the other. They know their position. So after the automotive, I ended up back in civil engineering with Balfour Beatty. Then I got collared into joining this team they put together to implement the Toyota production TPM. Toyota production TPS at Balfour Beatty and total quality management. And on the back of that, we got involved in a lot of Deming stuff, a lot of data gathering and statistical process analysis. And then that led to meeting up with Eli Goldratt, the critical chain, where he implemented it on one of our Balfour Beatty projects with us. So I was there at the beginning of that. And then came along lean thinking and the movement for innovation on the Egan. And Dan Jones, who wrote the book,
that's going back to what, early 90s, is it? The
early 90s, stuff?
Yeah.
It was 1999. Yeah. And we met with the Last Planner guys in the mid tested that all these things. And I joined. Then I got seconded into sort of under Egan. There was a group of us. We were sort of the innovation advisors regional, and obviously Dan Jones had put in a big chunk into the Egan report on lean. So my knowledge of the automotive industry and Toyota production system means we got involved in that, started doing lean thinking training, and also started promoting off-site. And I also got involved with promoting the various forms of contract. So, and then we introduced the national KPIs. And we thought that was really would transform things. If people started measuring their performance, because when we used to go around to project and say, okay, tell us about your past projects, how many finished on time? People say, we don't know, I don't know. All the project sponsors had no idea how many projects had finished on time. So then we introduced those sort of 10 KPIs and we started collecting the data, and they were analyzed, and I helped with some of the analysis and some of the validation as well, going to see people, how did you put all this data together? And all that then was published annually, signed up by the construction minister. So that went on for a while. And then when I was running all the lean workshops, people were saying, come and help us. But because we were in effect a government quango, we weren't allowed to provide any consultancy. So then I set up Lean Thinking Limited. And then from there, got involved in projects and lots of different projects, lots of water utility projects. I mean, all sorts of projects, lots of housing projects. We did lots of housing projects, and then got involved with the Ministry of Justice, MOJ, and started rolling out sort of critical chain, lean, partnering forms of contract, and we looked at various ways of build off-site, containers coming from China and being fitted out, that kind of thing. And throughout this journey, I've been involved with monitoring how projects progress and having to look in detail at all the programs that the project produce. And the more I've sort of got involved, the more I realize that actually, having had this sort of notices when I was with the stint I had with the automotive industry, it came to me that the most important thing we need to focus on is the actually project time.
Yeah. Is that what led you to start developing Timeist?
As I mentioned to you, Timeist is another word for somebody sort of who in the music world keeps track of the beat and the time. So I thought, that's it. This is what, and that's is what I feel is lacking. We've tried everything else. We've tried all the various forms of contract. We've tried various types of offsite. We keep relabeling all these things. We've tried BIM and digitalization and digital twins. So I think
we're still failing, aren't we? Even after all that. So what I'm interested in is, you've set up Timeist now, and I read on your website, and you told me that it can deliver projects 20 to 50% ahead of time. So this is all around what you're talking about, Ali, in terms of measuring time. And I love your analogy with the sports and the Olympics and everything, because you're absolutely right. If you haven't got a benchmark, if you haven't got something that you're measuring against, it's very hard to know whether you're being successful or not. But can you share an example of where a project has used Timeist methodologies and that's had that kind of transformative impact on the project, whether it's the time or the budget?
Well, I mean, some of this came into light, implementing critical chain. And with a critical chain, you have to, I don't know if you know the fever chart or the buffer chart. Tells you where you are in respect of the end date on a weekly basis. And then I realized actually, weekly is not enough. This has to be happening daily. And I also realized actually monitoring against the estimated time is the wrong thing to do. You need to actually monitor the real time, what's happening. Is the task being worked on, yes or no? Not whether it's meeting an estimated time or not. A task may have been estimated to take 5 days and is completed in 5 days. And then when you monitor it, you realize actually the guy only worked on it 3 days of the week. He did 1 day, he buggered off for 2 days, and then came back and did another 2 days. So the actual time spent was 3 days. So we lost 2 days. And again, so I was thinking, all this time we lose. And the other one,
is this all around the adage that work expands to fill the time? So if you give someone 5 days, they're going to say they've spent 5 days, even if they've spent 3 days.
One is that,
right?
and the other one is the student syndrome. If you give people too much time, then no, the students in there, people leave it till, if people think they've got more time than they need, they leave it till the last minute. And then they come back. Those are the two things with, if you give people too much, the estimate is too big. But also the fact is we are, when it comes to project time, there are two things about project time. If you improve project time, you improve so many other measures. Time has an impact on cost, is the biggest cost. The prelims cost is the biggest daily cost. It costs 70 million to 80 million pounds a day across the UK to deliver projects. And nobody's monitoring to see what's happening with that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Time, all costs has the fixed element and then the time-related element. So you expand the time, you expand
even
the cost.
An hour of extra. The other thing about time is, I realize, is that if you shorten the time, everybody benefits, actually. The shorter the project time, the sooner everybody gets off the site, and they're likely to save on their prelims. We spent 2 hours. Go on.
Ali, you mentioned right at the start of this call, you said that you were working for a company and you left because it didn't feel right. Looking back, can you pinpoint what was that feeling in terms of what it didn't feel right? Can you elaborate on that? Was it to do with time?
No, I mean,
itself?
nothing seemed to work when I was managing the project. I was always chasing, why isn't this material here? Why aren't the right people? I mean, at that time, most of the work was done labor only. So we had loads of people not turn up, the bricklayers, only 3 would turn up when you'd ask for 6. And then I was thinking, this actually is not intellectually engaging. What am I, except a few measurements on the drawings that, were wrong and you had to recalculate. Most of the time, you're actually just trying to keep people busy. Just imagine being a football manager.
And do you think,
just trying to say, just kick the ball about. Don't worry, you don't need to know what the score is. And you don't need to know how long you need to be on the pitch.
Yeah.
Go on, carry on. Sorry.
And since then, would you say things have drastically
project
improved?
Managers. I mean, I say I didn't manage a project. I managed keeping people busy. I didn't know what was happening to the project. I didn't go home at the end of the day thinking, did I shorten the project time or did I extend it or was it extended? Not personally. And that has not changed. Project managers on a day-to-day basis, in my view, nobody is managing projects. People are managing just tasks and running meetings and having design sessions.
I think it's so profound what you say there. We're just keeping ourselves busy, and like everyone loves saying that they're busy, and then you go around a construction site, no one will sit there saying they're not doing anything or they're bored, but are they doing the right thing in the right place? And what really took me about Timeist and your kind of methodology is this kind of scientifically accounting for time. So my question for you, Ali, is what way does it help? I loved your analogy with the modern SatNav. How does it kind of help to work similarly to a SatNav system for project management?
One of the things I've learned is that to track time properly, you can't, you don't track it against is not good enough to track it against a program with estimated times. It's like with cost, you track cost to the penny and then you may compare it to what the budget was, if that makes sense. So you've got a couple of things about the SatNav analogy. One is the SatNav tells you, reschedules, apparently 10 times a second, or what your position is. Yeah. The second thing about SatNav is it doesn't give you any report of what's happened behind you. It doesn't tell you.
No, it's always forward-looking.
All cars have computers, don't they? They've had computers for years. It tells you how many miles per hour average you've done. Nobody really looks at that anymore. People only look at, And the other, SatNav probably contains all the possible things in his database or whatever that could go wrong. But having that in place is not actually of much value. SatNav may know that on your journey, a car may end up being, could end up being on fire and on the whole shoulder. But until, it happens, and then somebody in front tells you that information of low value, having it in a sort of a register in the background, if that makes sense. So the this.
Yeah, it does.
And the other thing about the SatNav is it may sort of use historical information to tell you at the start of the journey when you're likely to be there. But once the journey starts, the SatNav picks up live information from 3 things ahead. The sensors above, the speed of the cars that use the same SatNav, and also people putting information in saying, car on fire or an accident or roadworks or a police car, which then takes all that into account to work out when you will arrive at your end destination.
Yeah. And I think the SatNav analogy is really helpful because everyone's used one, everyone understands how it works. I think I get it. But in terms of project data analytics, can you describe how that could work in a project context?
In terms of project context, is that we need to monitor, what's happening to the end date as we go along live. That's the output of the system. How many? Say a project is 100 days long. At the end of day 1, the system should tell me how many days is remaining. Is it 99 days or 99 and a half days, or is it 102 days? SatNav measures elapsed time, not actual time. SatNav takes into account problems ahead, which is what most of the time the planning system measures actual time. When planners walk around to update, their update is similar to the update of progress by the QSs. They go 50% done, so we're going to pay you 50%. Well, 50% done does not mean there's 50% of the, if it was a 10-day task, 50% done does not mean 5 days remaining.
Because I would say when you look at a project, and in terms of the progress within a project, it can be quite subjective, I would say, because a contractor might have a different view and the client might have a different view, and also the project manager might have a different view depending on the scope of works. Within a SatNav, you're in a certain position and it's a lot easier, it's a lot more tangible to understand where you are. So would you say within a project context, how can you unify people's opinions in terms of where we are in terms of progress?
That's a very good point. The way we monitor progress is we ask all the subcontractors how many days remaining of their tasks. How many days until the task is completed. Yeah, not how many days of work remaining. It may be 2 days of work remaining, but it may not be done for 10 days because the subcontractor knows the stuff's not coming for another 2 weeks. He got a phone call this morning saying, oh, by the way, that stuff is not available now, so it won't be coming through. So therefore, we know there's going to be 12 days now before that's completed. So then
and this is where I see some of the convolution within project delivery is that I think because people aren't aligned in terms of progress completion, it does cloud a lot of this clarity. And I think with the GPS, it's a lot more clear cut to understand. And I think this is why people struggle and develop different types of frameworks to deliver projects. Now, when you then look at the implementation of AI, and which is effectively math to code, there's a lot easier understanding because it's quantitative. And I think that's where some of the ambiguity is kind of relieved when you implement something like AI.
And I like the scientific approach because the other thing I found with planners and schedulers is there's the rose-tinted spectacles, Ali, where, say you've got 10 days for a task and then, 5 days into it, it doesn't matter if you've fallen behind, you still only got 5 days left, and they'll make themselves believe there's still only 5 days left, even if all the data's pointing in the opposite direction. So Timeist kind of sorts that out head on, doesn't it? By just saying, actually, you're going to deal with real live data in real time.
So you will know within a day or two, if you follow this system, where the project is at. It's not 100% accurate. There are still people may say, another 2 weeks before it comes. It may come after 8 days, but at least So, you could at the end of day 1 of a 100-day project end up with 110 days remaining. Because the guy says, actually, that's what driving the end date is not happening. You see, we spend when it comes to risk.
Data. That's real data.
When it comes, we're spending too much time on this risk management. We're looking at what could happen. Yeah, the SatNav is looking at what is happening, what's happening ahead, and takes that into account. We're looking at what could happen. What's the risk? What's the uncertainty? What's the complexity? all the stuff that could impact the project end date, that's, I mean, the list of complexity gets bigger and bigger the more the sort of the academic research into it. All that stuff doesn't happen on every project, and it doesn't happen in every project all the time. And when it does, it doesn't necessarily impact the end date. Agreed? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah.
The chance of
Yeah.
the chance of an answer,
this is part of the challenge.
you've got 100 parts of activities on a project, right? Somebody makes a change, a client. Which part of activity does not necessarily, there's a 1 in 100 chance that that the change impacts the critical path. It could be on the other 99 activities and paths and have no impact. But what is happening on projects is that we're losing all the projects globally, lose time every day, every hour of every day, and unknowingly. And we're not addressing that. We are squandering time. We're squandering time in 2 ways, and we are squandering something around 50% of the project time by 2 things. One is we don't prioritize all the activities. On a day-to-day basis, this is a factual information. You only, out of every 100 activities available, we only resource around 30%. Yeah. And that's not to do with labor shortage. And 30% is actually more than what we need to work on. 20% is enough. But the key is you need to work on the top 20% in the order of priority. Every day we have people working on the wrong priorities because nobody knows what the priorities are. Subcontractors come to work and they tell the man that they have a morning briefing, safety briefing, and they go around the table and they go, the project team, the main contractor, okay, Yoshi, where are you working? You say, I'm working here, there, there. You're telling them where you're going to earn the most money on that day, rather than what is the highest priority. And they go, fine, as long as James is not working in your area, as you're safe, you're fine, get on with it. And then, James, where are you working? That's how the whole, we're saying, no, Yoshi.
Well, Yoshi would never be seen working in the same place as me, so that kind of works. But this really speaks to something that's consistent on this podcast with people, and there's different sort of focuses, but it's around us not using data properly, because the data's there and we can generate it, but using that data to improve project efficiency is effectively a consistent problem that we've seen time and time again. And I want to move on to a question around implementation, right? Because what you've developed is clearly innovative and an approach that can tackle the problem. But how do you find the overcoming traditional methodologies and mindsets? I mean, what's the biggest challenge that you've faced in convincing organizations to adopt Timeist?
It's a big challenge to get people to focus on the priorities. So the 2 key measures we're saying at the end of every day, what happened to the end date? How much of the project day did you complete? Yeah. It's sort of 2 things in one, really. Did the end date move out? And how much was it? And the second one, how much of the top priorities did you work on? And the priorities change. The bottleneck of the system moves every day. You see, there's a lot of talk about complexity, big mega projects, and everyone talk about mega project, this and that, more complex. Doesn't matter what the size of the project. All these projects have only one bottleneck. It does not matter, is a giga project, mega project, they only have one bottleneck. The bottleneck determines the rate at which the project completes. And the difference between the more complex project and the less complex project is that the bottleneck moves more often. And if your system doesn't pick that up, that's why complex projects, because the bottleneck's moving probably 3 times a day and nobody has a clue. People are working on the wrong thing all the time.
Yeah. Well, this is one of my frustrations in the industry, that you do a progress meeting once a month and no one really checks it until the next month, and then you wonder why things have fallen back. And actually what you're proposing is that you need to check against that baseline pretty much every day, if not 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And Ali, so can you clarify, so what is the bottleneck? Is that
bottleneck is what drives the end date, usually the critical path. But knowing the critical path is not good enough. You need to know at least the 10 tasks close to most of the time, the parts of activities are very close to each other. If you improve the critical path, then something else instantly becomes critical and holds the end date out. You can't really improve the end date, bring it forward by more than 2 days, usually 1 day, because there's always a path of activities. So Yoshi, what's happening on a project is if you think of the path of activities, they're all like a train moving. This is your end date in the picture, and they're moving. So you got to be knocking off these ones that are getting closer. You got to know which ones are getting closer to the thing. Or the other way of looking at it, I look at like Tetris. You play Tetris? Yeah, you got to knock off. The things that are building up rather than the other bits that are further down. And so my view is there's no reason why every project manager, well, to me, project management definition is that you know the impact of every task on the end date every day. I don't expect you to remember 100 tasks, but I expect you to have a printout in front of you. So when you walk on site, you don't just go around saying, James, you all right? I've walked around with so many project managers, and all they do is go, all right, James, how's it going? Give us a shout if you need some help.
I've got no idea actually
I've come up with this idea that we have to do a daily ward round, collective ward round equivalent to a hospital. I got 2 doctors in my family. My wife is a consultant. My son is a junior doctor. And this idea came to listening to them. When they go around the ward round, they don't go, James, you're all right. If you're not feeling well, press the button, won't you? They'll say, how's it going, James? What's happening? If you're very critically ill, take your temperature.
They measure their vital signs.
And this is what I'm saying.
So
every
Ali,
day you do a collective walk. And I've tried everything.
I'm astounded that doesn't happen.
I think is the most effective thing to do, a daily collective ward round with a priorities list. You go to it and check every item. And say how many.
So Ali,
and the other thing is you can't, if you use estimated time, we're obsessed with this, gathering this historical data and working out. I don't know what we think we're making it more accurate. You can't make an estimate more accurate, by the way. You can.
No, an estimate's a point in time, isn't it?
You can, a 30-day estimate now, you gather historical data, does not make that 30 days different. All it does, it tells you what the probability of achieving that 30 days is if you gather more data. And if you, the other thing, sorry, I've not covered. I talked about the time lost due to lack of progress. The other thing is, it's called batching up work. Whenever you batch up work sits there waiting, and when that time accumulates, and most of the time, because of package managers, because of earned value, because of S-curves, because of drop lines, and everything we do leads to work being batched up. Every time you batch up work, it takes twice as long to complete the work. And we're not looking at these two things.
So Ali, on a project site, us as humans deliver the projects, the manufacturing, the construction aspect, etc., etc. But humans have a lot of, they're emotional thinkers. So even if you were to give someone a priority in terms of what to achieve and what to do, they'll be it'll be quite muddled because they're thinking with emotions. So if something happens on site, they might think this is their priority, or they need to jump here in this instance, and that they might not follow what the priority is. If we were to look into the future, let's say 10, 20 years, I'm not sure, and you would start to seeing, robots on site delivering a lot of this work, do you think that would augment and improve project outcomes, or do you think it would be a hindrance?
If you have robots that follow the priorities, then obviously it would benefit the project, without a doubt. But what I'm finding, Yoshi, is, as I mentioned earlier, reducing the project times benefits everyone. No other improvement benefits everyone. I guess you could say no safety. A lot of things I'm talking about, we practice as when it comes to safety. We gather data. We know exactly what's happening with safety. We know as soon as there's an incident, everybody knows. To me, if you lose a project day, everybody should know. Should be, on the website in the evening, I should be able to log in and say, what happened to that project? Did it lose a day? Yes or no? I've invested in 3 other businesses. and I can ring up or whatever at the end of every day and say, what was our turnover? What was the throughput? What was the number of visits? What was this and that?
Right, because you've got the live data. And it's well, part of the mission of the Project Data Analytics Task Force is exactly that. How can we use data more effectively? And it's frustrating in a way because it's taking longer than it should. But I think people are starting to open their eyes and ears to the issue. But one of the things that really struck me about Timeist is that it advocates for avoiding traditional benchmark project estimates, like you say, estimates are point in time. That is a standard practice in the industry. So how do you address these concerns, and what evidence can you provide to show that Timist's approach is more effective?
Well, I mean, I've worked on so many different types of projects, and I've got data. One of the other issues I've had for years is that whenever people have employed me, before some of this sort of a later Timist thinking came in, they've always, and I think this happens with all the initiatives, people think, is my project going to finish on time, yes or no, using this? They're not taking into account, actually, my project run late, but he'd run 10 days, finished 10 days earlier than he would have done, than he did. I saved my projects as 15 grand a day prelims, or, my HS2 is 200 grand a day prelims. He run late, but implementing this system, I saved 20 days. I've saved a shed load of money. And until we get to that position of monitoring daily what's happening, and then if you monitor daily, at the end of the project, people say, oh, we could have done better. Well, how much better? I can tell you, using Timeist, you will know exactly how many days better you could have done.
Oh, it's interesting because how many times does a project, it starts off with a bad estimate, whether that's time or cost, and then you're on hiding to nothing for the rest of the project, because even if you deliver incredibly efficiently, you'll always be measured against that inaccurate estimate. So I see a lot for how, because that will be a virtuous circle. Once we actually start collecting the data and doing that, it will make the estimates
But you can't.
better.
This is my thing. Estimates are never wrong. They're not incorrect. They can't be bettered. An estimate is an estimate. It's just different estimates have different probabilities. So you need to say a 10-day task. To call this 10 days has an 80% chance of it being achieved. So you're always starting with a 20% failure rate on all your tasks. Most planners would say, and we're spending too much time fussing about programs. Okay, let me tell you something about programs. It makes no difference. All you need is a software that reschedules. You can't use Excel, because with Excel you can't tell if with the end date moved out or not, because you can't reschedule at the end of the day. And most people in the QSs and procurement people and designers all use Excel, because they book their time rather than monitor. They go, I had 10 hours and I've used 10 hours, therefore I was on time. But no. You had 10 hours, you spent 2 hours this week, 2 hours, 3 weeks later, you took 5 weeks to do what should have been done in a day. Anyway, so this issue of, we have to have this particular fancy software and all the reports, as I said, SatNav doesn't produce any reports. So if SatNav doesn't do it, your software doesn't need to produce any historical report. 80% of what's on the program is repeats. Yeah. If you're building, I can give you a sequence of work that you would not be able to tell me if it's a school, is a block of flat, is a hotel, or it's a hospital. It's the same. First fix, second fix, this, that, the other, with the minor tweaks. You may have an oxygen pipe in a hospital that you don't have. You may have hot. So, and all, to say AI can produce a program, it really is not such a big deal, because most softwares have templates. And one other thing that
so the AI can be used for the monitoring rather than producing the program. It's actually that forward, that doing what the SatNav does. The SatNav has become more and more agile, exactly. So it's got the fixed points that it knows about. It knows exactly how long it takes to go from A to B and what the speed limit is on that road. But it also, SatNav is now picking up events that happen. If there's a crash, it's told, and it will readjust the program. And that's what I think some of these AI softwares out there have got the ability to do. So I think there is a place for AI and and what Yoshi mentioned before, robots and robotics to massively improve the efficiency. But we got to get the
Well, this is what I was
fundamentals
kind of
right.
leading into that. That's what I was leading into that, James. I mean, robots, but then there's a question of job displacement, but we won't go into that.
No.
But Ali, I think
That's
this is a really
session.
interesting. Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. I mean, this approach to tackling projects and programs, I think, is definitely one to look out for. Could you let people know a bit more about where they can find information about
the
Timeist?
website is www.timist, timist.co.uk. We put all the, I pulled together based on having tried and tested lean and agile and TOC and critical chain, all the underlying principles. I play a lot of tennis and I'm obsessed with understanding the mechanics of a good forehand. Yeah. And more often than not, when I hit a good forehand, although I know the mechanics, they all link together by chance. Yeah. And I think that's what's happening. All projects that finish on time are completing by chance because the fundamentals that need to align are happening by chance. And more often than not, we use so many fundamentals like digitalization or offsite, which is in effect concurrent engineering, parallel processing.
Well, it's very similar to what Andy Murray talks about, where he says, at the moment we're winging it.
100%.
Because there's a level of aleatoric risk, right? There's a level of aleatoric risk that you can't control. So you might have all the pins lined up in the right place, but you still might miss it purely because you can't manage every bit of risk. You can manage the epistemic that you know and you have knowledge of, but when it comes to, there's a certain level of randomness and chance associated with that final delivery.
But that's fine. But as long as you can show me that you've actually aligned, when I prepare for a forehand, you got to tell me, did I prepare properly? But if I mishit it because the ball doesn't bounce the way I expected it, but at least I put together all the steps in preparation to hit the ball. I'm saying that we don't even have those steps in place. Set aside, where the ball bounces.
Yeah, I can see that.
Ali, there is an awful lot to chew on there and covered a lot of ground in 35 minutes or so. And I'm sure we're going to need to get you back on the podcast in the future to dive into some of these areas in a bit more detail. But in the meantime, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for coming on.
Before I go, the thing with the timers.
Of course. I was going to give you the last word, so please go.
I've pulled together a number of principles that I think need to be practiced daily. All these principles are common knowledge. Nothing fancy about it, like data, science, short feedback loop. That's the key about SatNav, is a short feedback loop. Instantly there's a problem. Most of the time on a project there's a problem, we don't know, for days go by. And all those things, and they need to be applied interconnectedly focused on shortening the project time. And when you Yoshi, you talked about that we're dealing with humans. Most subcontractors engage with this more than they do, because anything else they lose out. Any value engineering, somebody loses out when you're reducing costs. But with this, subcontractors all engage because they know, that, and also because when you do the ward round, they're all you're creating horizontal accountability, which helps. So it's not all top down, and you're saving so much time because contractors do not allow subcontractors to talk to each other. You probably know that. So everything has to go up and down. Anyway, we can go on for this for hours. Sorry.
There's not a huge amount of trust, but that's really interesting. And if what we'll do is we'll put some of those ideas in the show notes for people to chew on. But it does sound like, Ali, we could have gone on for a long, long time. It does sound like we need to schedule in another session to talk about some of those issues in a bit more detail. So stay tuned, everyone, because we will get Ali back on. But in the meantime, Ali, thank you so much for your time. It's been a real pleasure having you on. Until next time, take care.
Thank you for listening to the Project Flux podcast. We hope you found the discussion with Ali Mafi on data analytics and the Timeist system interesting. Don't forget to explore the show notes for all the links and resources that were discussed today. Be sure to tune in again next Wednesday for our weekly pulse. And remember, the Project Flux newsletter will be available on Monday with even more great content. Subscribe to stay updated. Until next time, take care.